Hello everybody! Everybody knows JSON, right? But what about JSON-LD and the use for SEO strategies? Are you already using them? This is Stef from Samayas and welcome to my channel. So this video is part of a series of SEO strategies wherein we look first at the definition of what we can do and then dig in with .NET. So JSON-LD in essence is the combination of structured data with JavaScript. Well, it's not really JavaScript since it never gets executed, but JavaScript is just a placeholder to store it inside your pages. So basically, when you create a web page, it's completely unstructured data. Even though your HTML is structured and follows a syntax of its own, you have a total freedom to write what you want. Other than the HTML tag and the head and the body, you can do whatever you want. And even the head is optional. And in the body tag, you can do whatever you want. Loads of websites follow a certain pattern wherein you might have a header, a body and a footer. But that is by no means an obligation. Search engines try to parse those pages and sometimes it's easier than other times. And based on that, they try to reference your pages/websites. Well, nowadays, in come JSON and JSON-LD. JSON is the abbreviation of JavaScript object notification. And most developers have been using that a long time. And LD stands for linked data. So in essence, we try to introduce something structured into something which is inherently unstructured data, so that search engines might have a better understanding of what your page might be used for. Even though it's something that seems like quite new, it's something that Tim Berners-Lee has outlined decades ago. Everybody knows Tim, right? So JSON-LD introduces the idea that a computer should understand the meaning and the relationship between the data and not just the display content. So nowadays, search engines aren't just simple web crawlers anymore. And especially with AI coming around the corner, this is even becoming more and more important. When you add a JSON-LD structure to your web page, it's not just a decoration for a search engine. You're creating a machine-readable graph of your entire website. And not just a tree with all pages, but detailed information of each of those pages. If I would need to explain that to my 2-year-old self, well, HTML tells me how to show something. JSON-LD tells me what I'm looking at. We do know when we're looking at a graph, or a price, or a product, or the size of something, or a customer review. However, our 2-year-old self doesn't know that. It just sees text. And of course, in the age of artificial intelligence, the metadata and the decoration or the data becomes more and more important. It's also a much cleaner separation of concern. You have your own data or HTML and you have your metadata or JSON-LD, which describes things. No extra need anymore to hide tags inside your HTML trying to explain what a field is. Easy to generate and simply to test and to validate. Now, since JSON-LD is structured, of course, there's a schema definition somewhere. But that does require you to learn a new language and to understand it. We have a number of different page types. First, we have a simple web page. Simple to understand, right? This is the fundamental type. Every page on your site should have a web page markup at minimum. It tells the search engines this is a distinct web document with its own URL, breadth composition, and potential its own purpose. Web page is a parent type for more specific pages like item page, collection page, search page, result page, profile page, etc. There, you need to choose wisely which type of pages matches your content, of course. Then we have an article, and it's more specific child type, like a news article. Here's where things get quite interesting. An article page is for any piece of content that stands alone, like a blog post or a tutorial or an opinion piece or research papers. You define a headline, the description author, the publication date, the modification date, and the article body. News article takes things even further with additional properties like a dateline, a print edition, a print section, etc. And then Google's algorithm actually treats news articles differently for things like Google News inclusion and article snippets in search results. The key difference: news articles signal journalistic content with timelessness and news values, while articles could be more for educational purpose. Person and organizations are entity types that describes who or what is behind the content. Persons isn't just for authors' bylines anymore. You can describe job titles, affiliations, social profiles, contact information, and relationships with other entities. When you properly mark up a person, you're contributing to Google's knowledge graph. And of course, AI engines as well. That means that when somebody searches for a person, your structured data helps build their knowledge panel. Organizations work in a similar way than persons, but they represent companies, non-profits, schools, banks, sport teams, etc. You can specify the organization logos, founding date, location, parent organization, subsidiaries, social profiles, contact points for customer service, and even things like numbers for business verifications. This is critical for local SEO because organization markups often includes postal address and geo-coordinates, which feeds into local search results and map listings. You can already feel it, right? The sky is the limit. And here's where things get powerful. Nesting those types. Your news article doesn't just have an author string, it has an author property that references person object with all their details. That person might work for an organization, that organization might have a location, that location might have a geographic location, etc., etc. And so you're building a web of interconnected semantics data that describes the entire entity of your content. Breadcrumb lists is another critical type that people overlook. It's not just for those nice breadcrumb trails in search results. It tells search engines the hierarchical structure of your website, which influences how they understand your informational architecture and how they display links in the same search results. Product and offer types are essential for e-commerce. Product descriptions, what you're selling, the name, the image, the description, the brand, the SKU, the reviews, etc. An offer describes a commercial transaction, price, currency, availability, shipping details, return policy. Local business is a huge brick and mortar operation. It extends organizations with properties like opening hours, price range, accepted payment methods, menu URLs for restaurants, geo-coordinates, etc. This directly impacts your Google business profile and your local PAC ranking. Even markup is self-explanatory, but underutilized. For instance, for concerts, webinars, conferences, product launches, which offers all of those benefits of structured event data, with start and end times, locations, ticket information, and performers or organizers. FAQ and how-tos are newer types that can earn your enhanced search result features. An FAQ page markup can display your questions and answer directly in search results. How-to shows step-by-step instructions with images and estimated times. Of course, this is just the top of the iceberg, and I'm sure I missed a load of the details. But you get the point, right? So today, I'll dig into how you can easily integrate JSON-LD in your ASP.NET MVC and, as a final result, in your HTML page. So let's dig in. So as you can see, I've created a very simple JSON-LD project, and let's first have a run and see what's modified. And this is again the same sample I've used in previous SEO projects. I have a logo, I have my company name, I still have my home and my privacy page. I created a new article page, I've created a new blog post page, and I've created a new about page. Very simple. Now if we look at the project itself, first we have a www root directory. Under there I've added some dummy images. Next I still have one controller, my home controller. In there I already had my index method and my privacy method, and I've added an article method, a blog post method, and about. Very simple. Next, I've created a view model directory, and under the view model directory, I created a base view model. And a base view model has a constructor which takes title, meta description, and keywords as parameters. And this is something I've already created in previous samples. And of course, each of those properties are exposed as a model. Of course, then I have a view model which inherits from my base view model, which has a simple constructor which passes everything along to my base view model. In a more complex scenario with more controllers, you might have more view models. And then finally, I still have my error view model, which I've renamed from error model to error view model, which is still standalone and doesn't inherit for anything. Of course, I'm working on a working sample, but technically for this simple JSON-LD, you don't really need view models. And then next, of course, I have my 5 pages. I have my about page, I have my article page, my blog post page, my index page, and my privacy page. And to simply put the JSON-LD in the page, I follow the same principle as with the previous samples. I've created a section called JSON-LD, and in there I used HTML raw to output the entirety of the script. Now pay attention, because my double quotes need to be doubled to be able to be put in HTML raw. If I don't put double quotes twice, but just one time, it doesn't work. That is the only disadvantage of this solution. And then of course, for each of the pages, I fine-tuned the whole structure with type, ID, URL, name, etc. And this is the kind of scenario where you might use an online generator to first generate your JSON-LD, and then you just copy and paste, and you have no other issues. Very simple, very easy. Of course, as you can see as well, name and description isn't properly filled in, but this is just a sample. Also pay attention that my about page is a type web page, my index page is also of a type web page, and so is my privacy page. However, my article page is of type article, and suddenly I have a completely different JSON structure. My blog post is more or less the same as my article, but is completely different from the other three. If I look at my about, I have a notion of a graph, which I don't have for my article and my blog post. And of course, once we have that section, the only thing we need to do is to go to our layout page, and in here, already from my previous sample, I have my render section link canonical, and now I've just added a second one, a render section JSON-LD, which again is not required because my error page doesn't have it. And if it would be required, my error page would fail. And then finally, we have the program CS, which is not modified at all. So all in all, a very simple sample. If you only have one website and you have nothing complex, this might just be perfect. For those who are paying attention, again here we have hard-coded the URL, and currently it's localhost, but if you want to go for this solution, you need to put in www your site name for it to work. And of course, for the more complex scenarios, we'll have a look at it in the next solution. So now I've created a modelized JSON-LD solution, which is partly based on my simplified JSON-LD solution, but also on my modelized canonical solution. If we have a quick look, for those who are paying attention, we have a lot of site names which are hard-coded immediately into our JSON. And here currently it's HTTPS, localhost and a port number. If you just have a simple website and that's it, well, you might just replace the localhost by www, and that might be okay. However, when you tend to go to the corporate world, you end up in a lot more complex scenarios, where you have a www website, but also a staging, a testing, and a development website. And from a development point of view, having the correct URLs on each of those JSONs is quite important. And next to this JSON, in general, you will have a number of other attributes and things you need to tweak per environment. Whether or not the non-production website should be accessible by Google search is another question. Now the first thing I did in my modelized JSON-LD, I created a models directory, and I already previously have my canonical model. And then the first thing I copied over was my canonical model, wherein I have my site URL, my subpart, and whether or not it's active. And here then I will merge my canonical model in combination with a new JSON-LD model. And so the new model I've created is JSON-LD. And currently for my use, these are all the fields I've added. Now, of course, JSON-LD is very complex, is very large, and I certainly haven't covered everything. But for my use currently, that was sufficient. So in line with my canonical, again, I've added a has JSON-LD, whether or not I want to have it displayed or not. Next, I have a JSON-LD type, which is an enumeration, and currently these are the types I support. Next, I have the description, which will be used in most scenarios. Next, I have the possibility to add images. I can add an author, and I have an author type. My author can be either a person or an organization. I can specify a publisher organization LinkedIn, publisher organization X, a publisher logo, the size of the publisher logo, when the item was published, and a headline. So this object is quite extensive. Now if we go back to our base view model, in this scenario we absolutely do need it. My base view model takes a title, takes a meta description, takes keywords, takes my previous canonical model and my new JSON-LD model. And for each of those objects passed, of course, they're accessible. And then of course my home view model just inherits from my base view model and all of the parameters are passed along. And again, this is a very simple sample, but in a more complex scenario, you might have one view model per controller. And each of those view models might also have some tuning depending on the specificities of your website, of course. Each controller also might have a view model depending on the specificities of your website. So now that we have the mechanism to store our JSON-LD model, we need to create it. So let's have a look at that. And here again, now I have a home controller and I have a base web controller. This also is copied from my previous video canonical, and in my base web controller, I hardcode my site URL, which in a real-world scenario would be read from a database or a configuration file. I have the get action, which also is needed for my canonical. I have my controller short name and my controller name. And if we go to the home controller, I've slightly tweaked it. For each of those methods, I first create a canonical model and then I create a JSON model. Now, depending on the type of JSON-LD you create, you do have a headline or not. For simplicity here, I created one helper method and I just take a headline which can be empty or not. In a real-world scenario, you might have overrides of this function. And so here, I call a helper method JSON-LD model, which takes the bare minimum. It takes the headline or not, it takes the description for this page or not, it takes an array of images if it's there, and it takes the type of JSON-LD. And all the other properties, currently, I've just put on the bottom in this helper method. Again, this is just a quick and dirty demo. If you have more than one controller, you might extract this helper method to a helper class so that you don't have to copy that code every time. And so here, I just fill up the previously created JSON-LD model, which takes my headline description type, which automatically enables it, and then the values, which are always the same depending on the project, is like the publisher, the organization, the publisher logo, and the publisher size. Now, if you really want, you can do this method by method, but then you duplicate code. And if that changes, that might need to be modified as well. Also, I've hard-coded this here, but again, this might come from a configuration file or a resource file, etc. So now we have our base view model, we have our home view model, our home controller created the necessary objects for each of those methods. What's next? Well, now we need to display that in the page. And for that, let's go to the layout. And as you can see already, I have a previous block specifically dedicated to my has canonical. And now I've added a new block specifically for JSON-LD. Technically, you can completely implement the JSON ID without canonical. But then again, we're trying to extend our page to be as SEO likable as possible. And so they go hand in hand. And so here the code is quite simple. I check if my model has a JSON-LD model. If it does, if it's active, if not, it skips it. If it is active, I call my JSON-LD article builder, where I pass a number of parameters for my model. The first object I pass is my JSON-LD model. The second object I pass is my canonical model. And then finally, I still pass the title of the page. And my builder will return a complete JSON-LD. And then I just use an HTML raw to output it to the page. Quite simple, right? And so if I have a little run, the page is still working. If I look at a source, again, I have my nice JSON-LD. Quite easy, fixed, right? Well, not exactly. And so this looks quite simple, right? Of course, the sauce of the pudding is in the JSON article builder. And that took me quite some time to construct something that was working. Since we've previously seen that the JSON is quite different depending on the JSON-LD type we choose. So in my first build JSON-LD, I have some very clear and distinct blocks. I have my homepage and webpage, which are one type. Building a person is of another type. Building an organization is of another type. Building a website is even something else. Then I have my FAQ, my how-to, and my video object, which are comparable. And then everything else falls back to the default. I know I shouldn't be defining this, but for clarity, in this sample, I did. And then underneath, I have some complex JSON building, where I translate my object to the correct JSON. Of course, this sample will also be posted underneath the video, and so you can check it out. But this is basically what needs to be done. Now for my use, I built it myself, but there might already be quite some nugget libraries who just do the same thing. So this just shows you a possibility of how you could implement your JSON-LD in your website. So even though JSON-LD can be pretty overwhelming, it's also very powerful. You can start small with just one web page and then extend depending on the type of website you have. At basic, you could just have a simple copy-pasted JSON-LD per page, or you can create a complex object model structure which allows you to show all of the JSON-LD schemas. But then again, that's up to you. If you guys enjoy this content, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell sign. Or leave a comment down below.